Welcome to this focus about the management of swine breeding. Pigs represent the largest livestock category in the European Union before bovine. In 2018, indeed, there were 148 million pigs in the European Union. The countries with the highest production of pig meat in 2019 were Germany with 5.2 million tons and Spain with 4.6 million tons, followed by France with 2.2 million tons of pig meat producer. Together, these three countries account for more than half of the European Union's total pig meat production. Despite these encouraging numbers, pig farming presents several challenges, including ethical concerns, animal welfare, and, of course, environmental impacts. From an environmental perspective, one of the main issues is the risk of pollution of surface and groundwater from the excreted nutrients, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus, which can lead to the eutrophication of rivers, lakes, and seas. Nitrates, being highly mobile in the soil, can leach into groundwater, particularly if their concentration becomes too high. They can also contaminate surface waters through runoff, especially when the wastewater is applied excessively or incorrectly to land. Phosphorus, on the other hand, is generally less mobile in the soil compared to the nitrates, but it poses a threat to surface water primarily through soil erosion and runoff. Nitrogen and phosphorus, along with other elements such as trace metals, are present both in the inputs, so in the feed, and also in the outputs, so in manure or slurry, of pig farming. And their potential to cause pollution can be influenced by several factors. These include, of course, starting from the beginning, the composition of the diet, the moisture content of the manure, the amount of waste applied per unit of land, and the timing of its application, but also the present type and growth stage of crops, as well temperature and regarding nutrient concentration and manure moisture, the most important factors that can affect these two parameters are, for sure, the animal diet, but also the type of housing adopted. The efficiency of use of food has an important effect on nutrient excretion, especially with regard to nitrogen. Regarding the pig's diet, it is mainly based on cereals and soybean meal, which are rich in nitrogen. In modern pig production, approximately 6.3 kilos of nitrogen is required to raise an 8 kilos piglet to a 110 kilos finishing pig. Of this amount, about 46% of the nitrogen is retained in the animal body for growth and maintenance, while the remaining 54% is excreted, primarily through feces and urine. And the digestible fraction of dietary protein is absorbed in the small intestine as free amino acids and small peptide, which are then utilized for muscle protein synthesis, tissue renewal, and various metabolic processes. However, when the supply of amino acids exceeds the animal's requirement for protein deposition and maintenance, the surplus amino acids were deaminated, producing ammonia. This ammonia is hence converted into urea in the liver via the urea cycle and subsequently excreted in the urine. The urinary nitrogen fraction, mainly so in the form of urea, represents the major pathway of nitrogen loss in pigs fed with conventional high-protein diets. In pigs fed with conventional diets, this fraction of the excreted nitrogen is generally the most important. One strategy to reduce nitrogen excretion is to formulate diets that include synthetic amino acids and appropriately combine protein sources. This allows pigs to receive the exact amounts of amino acids they need in diets close to the so-called ideal protein. By doing so, excess nitrogen is avoided, reducing nitrogen catabolism and consequently the nitrogen excretion in the urine. In particular, during the 1990s, several studies were carried out to evaluate the possibility of lowering the protein level in pig diets while supplementing with industrially produced amino acids in order to maintain a balanced amino acid composition. The studies showed that it is possible to reduce the protein content of the feed by up to about 30% without compromising the production performance, as long as it is supplemented with free amino acids that are nowadays commonly available on the market. The essential amino acids that are most frequently limiting in cereal-based rations and therefore most relevant for our supplementation in pig breeding are lysine, methionine, threonine, and tryptophan. Reducing the protein content of the diets while ensuring at the same time the intake of required amino acids can also save energy associated with the urea synthesis. A lower nitrogen excretion in the urine combined with a shift in the urinary to fecal nitrogen ratio in favor of feces also reduce the risk of nitrate leaching, helps limit the ammonia emissions and decrease the odor production. Additionally, this approach contributes to a reduction in the urine pH due to change in the electrolyte balance caused by the lower dietary protein. A lower urine pH further reduces ammonia volatilization. Another important strategy is to reduce the nitrogen content in diet according to the different stage of growth and fattening, with supplies of proteins, amino acids, vitamins suited to the specific needs of each stage. This will allow to limit nitrogen excretion. Currently, in the production of heavy pigs, it is normal practice to adopt 2 or 3 different feeds during the whole production cycle, with a progressive reduction in the protein level. This multi-phase technique would require the mixing of 2 feeds in continuously varying proportion, whose amino acid contents meet, for one, the needs of the beginning of the fattening cycle, and, for the other, those of the end of the cycle. In order to have the same amino acid balance throughout the growth period, the 2 feeds should have the same amino acid profile, at least for the first limiting essential amino acids. However, it should be noted that the requirement of threonine, tryptophan, and sulfur amino acids relative to lysine tends to be slightly higher during the finishing phase, due to the greater importance of the maintenance requirements. This multi-phase system is applicable using the automated feed mixing and distribution facilities that have an additional cost, of course, but on the other hand, lead to advantages in terms of reduction of the excreted nitrogen. As example, in a growth phase from 25 to 105 kilos, with the multi-phase technique, there was a reduction in the nitrogen excretion of about 20%, assuring the same performance in terms of growth and quality of carcasses. Regarding phosphorus, about 70% of the ingested phosphorus is excreted in the urine or feces. Current knowledge relating to the bioavailability of phosphorus in foods of plant origin and studies on the efficacy of the phytase enzyme provide tools to improve the bioavailability and thence the use of phosphorus by the animal, improving the percentage of phosphorus that will be used and hence retained, and reducing the phosphorus in percentage in pig waste. Indeed, it is known that phosphorus present inside plants is included in complex structures such as phytates, so salts of phytic acids, that are poorly digested and metabolized by pigs. Of course, the poor digestibility of phosphorus of vegetable origin imposes the need for strong integration with inorganic phosphorus, which on the contrary is generally characterized by high digestibility in pig. Even if, of course, there are significant differences between the different forms. So, nowadays, synthetic phytases are available, which, if used correctly in the diet, can improve the bioavailability of phytonic phosphorus and allowing to reduce the overall levels of phosphorus in diets. This will consequently limiting its release into the environment. So based on the results of some studies, the use of phytase in the diet could make it possible to reduce the excretion of phosphorus by 40–50%. A particularly important aspect of the impact on the environment of intensive pig farms, which also affect the welfare of animals and sometimes the health of operators, is represented by the emission of ammonia from wastewater and manure. The effects on animals of a high concentration of ammonia are different. We can see a reduction in body gain, a worsening of conversion rates, acute inflammation of respiratory system, an increase in cannibalism, and a delay in reaching sexual maturity. Indeed, in gills, due to damage to the olfactory system, we have a consequent difficulty in recognize male pheromones. Moreover, operators who are exposed to high concentration of ammonia for several hours each day can also suffer considerable damage. The most observable effects are attributable to tearing, burning, and irritation of the eyes and upper respiratory tract. We can also experience nausea or loss of appetite. So several techniques have been studied to reduce ammonia emission from pig manure. As already mentioned above, some interventions on diets, such as the multiphase technique, so reducing the protein content and supplementing that with amino acids, can reduce the amount of nitrogen that is catabolized and eliminated in the urine. Indeed, the reduction of the urine pH due to alteration of the electrolyte balance that is caused by the reduction of the protein contents of the diet also involves a lower volatilization of ammonia. Many studies have also highlighted the influence of the use of non-starch polysaccharides on the pH and on the emission of ammonia from pig waste. Indeed, the administration of non-starch polysaccharides would result in a shift of nitrogen excretion from urinary nitrogen to fecal nitrogen due to microbial proliferation in the large intestine of the pig. The formulation of diets containing high non-starch polysaccharides, for example with the aid of dehydrated beet pulp or barley, can make it possible to obtain a reduction in the ammonia emission from manure, with a decrease in the urinary nitrogen excretion and an increase in fecal excretion. The pH reduction of the manure would be due to the development of volatile fatty acids in the intestine and in manure as a result of the fermentation of the non-starch polysaccharides. In particular, the inclusion of high levels of beet pulp in the diet tends to cause a lowering of the pH of the manure. There is a close correlation between the pH of the manure and the ammonia emission. Calculating a 45% of reduction in ammonia emission in manure for each unit of decrease in pH. Some studies told us that the inclusion of beet pulp in the ratio of 15% of the diet led to advantages in terms of ammonia emission, so less 8.5%, compared to the control diet, without negatively affect the performance of the animals in any phase of their growth. On the other hand, the adoption of a higher level of beet pulp, such as higher than 30%, while allowing an even more important reduction in ammonia emission compared to the control diet, so less than 33% of ammonia, showed a negative effect on production performance of the animals, but only in the animals that weighed below of 120 kilos, while it did not alter the performance of pigs that weighed between 120 and 170 kilos. It should be emphasized that the use of diets containing pulp, if on the one hand involves a reduction in the ammonia emission, if used a lot, on the other hand, can lead to an increase in methanogenesis, especially in the last stage of heavy pig breeding. Regarding ammonia emissions from breeding and storage facilities, these can be reduced with careful control of the climatic condition inside the sheds. So have a look on temperatures and airspeed with sensors technologies. In this regard, the precision livestock farming approach could be very useful. Indeed, numerous sensors are used actually for monitoring airspeed, air quality, humidity, and gas concentration. Another important action could be the optimization of the characteristics of breeding structures, such as a reduction of the emitting surfaces, a frequent removal of manure, and the coverage of storage facilities. A quick and effective burial of the manure in the ground can also allow to reduce ammonia emission during and after the distribution of the manure onto the fields. Another environmental problem connected in part with ammonia emissions is represented by the odor generated by pig sties, especially the intensive ones. More than 160 volatile compounds have been identified in pig manure, and at least 13 of these contribute to the bad smell of fresh pig manure. They can be grouped into four main groups of compounds. We can have a look here. We can have volatile fatty acids, phenolic compounds, indoles, and sulfides, to which ammonia and SO2 and NO2 are added. These compounds derive from the microbial metabolism that occur in the large intestine and in the manure. The other limitation mainly pass through intervention of cleaning and on a correct handling and conservation of manure and on the practice of spreading manure on agricultural land, while the manipulation of animal diets in this case seems to give limited results. So the reduction of nitrogenous excretion obtainable through the limitation of the protein content of diet with a better amino acid balance involves the reduction of some of these compounds, but not all that are responsible for the emissions of the odors by pig manure. Many trials are ongoing regarding the possibility of reducing the problems of the bad smell by adding additives to the diet, such as acids, binding agents, or enzymes. Repeated and abundant fertilization of agricultural land with the pig manure can lead to the accumulation of heavy metals in the soil over time. In particular, this problem concerns copper and zinc. This phenomenon depends on the fact that these elements are generally supplied in excess in diets, given of course their importance for the health and the performance of the animals. However, the retention of the heavy metals is very low and most of the ingested is hence excreted. The accumulation of these metals in soils can be phytotoxic and can constitute a risk factor not only for human but also for animal health. A more precise knowledge of the needs of pigs in the different stages and of the bioavailability of these elements, of course, can allow to avoid strong overdoses. Some food techniques, such as the addition of microbial phytase or the use of organic forms of chelates, characterized by greater bioavailability, can reduce a little bit the copper and zinc contents inside the diet by limiting the risk of soil pollution. In the last 20 years, outdoor pig farming has experienced a resurgence in Europe, partly due to policies that are promoting animal welfare. So many European countries have witnessed a revival of the so-called outdoor pig farming. So today, this farming method is valued not only for animal welfare, but also for other reasons, such as the use of marginal areas and particularly wooded land that couldn't be used in any case, economic consideration or conservation of the endangered native breeds, promotion of organic livestock, and so a consumer interest in the high quality products. Some scientific studies indicate that animals raised outdoor benefit from greater physical activity, which of course promotes in turn their well-being. In contrast, pigs that were reared in confined space often exhibit abnormal aggression due to limited movement. So the outdoor pig farming, when combined with a natural diet, also may enhance the ergonoleptic and nutritional qualities of meat. Of course, these farming methods present several challenges. Managing natural resources in forests can be difficult, particularly with high animal density, which may lead to environmental impacts in such a way. Additionally, estimating the nutritional needs of the animals raised solely on pasture or in a woodland area can be very complicated. Overall, the outdoor pig farming offers significant advantages in terms of animal welfare, product quality, and biodiversity conservation, but it requires careful management in order to mitigate the environmental and logistical. In Mediterranean countries, due to their particular orography, we can have predominantly sloping territory with large so-called marginal areas that are not usable with intensive agro-technical systems. And the difficulty of mechanization of these areas, of course, limits their use with open field crops, allowing their exploitation only with grazing. Therefore, the pastoral activity is of fundamental importance for the exploitation of disadvantaged areas since it allows to obtain an income for the local population and thus avoiding the abandonment of the territory. The abandonment can cause serious socio-economic and also environmental problems, as the protection of the territory is a factor of fundamental importance for the protection of the environment. Most of these territories have a mixed or specialized wooded area, such as chestnut groves, which, if in a state of abandonment, can represent an ideal habitat for pig breeding, since pigs are able of exploiting the various food resources, such as chestnuts, acorns, tubers, roots, or bulbs. The outdoor pig farming allows to contain the initial investment costs, which amount to only 20-25% of a conventional pig breeding intensive one, since the structures are simple and cheap and made with low-cost materials such as wood, corrugated roofing in sheet material or fiber cement, often using in company labor. The highest expense is represented by the fence, which must be made with poles and very resistant net, and must be partially buried to prevent the escape of the animals. With regard to management costs, breeding in woodland pasture determines a reduction in feeding cost, especially in periods of falling berries, with positive effects on the quality of meat products. An example is represented by the Spanish Dehesa, where the outdoor breeding of the Iberian pig, fed mainly on acorns, has led to an expansion of the meat processing sector with economic benefits for farmers. The pig is the animal that more than any other animals benefits from grazing in terms of the quality of fresh but also processed products. The ingestion of spontaneous forest products improves both the organoleptic and the dietary characteristics of the meat and the fat. The meat, and in particular the cured meats and sausages, have excellent quality characteristics, conferred by the aromas present in the woods, and of course by the less stressful condition typical of the outdoor life. Furthermore, the fatty acid composition tends to shift the saturated unsaturated fatty acid ratio towards the polyunsaturated ones, with positive effects on the health aspects of the products. However, an excessive increase of this fatty acid, so the polyunsaturated one, can cause problems during the transformation processes as they determine a lower consistency of the cured meats and higher predisposition to oxidative processes. The high energy expenditure due to motor activity in grazing and due to a diet with products of the forest that have a low energy value leads to a reduction in the growth of the animals and to a longer breeding period. So for this reason, pigs reared on pasture, even if slaughtered at a greater age and at a lower weight than the traditional ones, show a greater state of fattening, especially of which are the disadvantages of the outdoor pig farming. Let's say that this type of breeding causes problems related to climatic stress, wounds, and trauma. So it is possible to reduce the intensity of heat stress with shaded areas and pools of water where animals can cool off during the summer. Regarding cold stress, which mainly affects young piglets, it is possible to intervene with shelters that are equipped with comfortable litter. We can also have pig grazing damage, and the environmental impact of grazing pig is caused by multiple factors, linked both to an excessive exploitation of the grassy turf and of the shrubby cover. This is due to an intense browsing activity of the animals, since they have a high voracity, and there is also a considerable disturbance caused to the ecosystem by some its particular behavioral habits of the pigs. The extent of the damage to the environment depends not only on the animal load but also on the type of essences present in the forest. In outdoor pig farming, the selection and the choice of the plants by the animals depend on a multitude of factors, such as physical characteristics, such as the color, the texture, the structure of the plants, or the content in water, but also by chemical characteristics, for example, aroma, the odor, the amount of organic acids, carbohydrates, amino acids, alkaloids. So the pig has a very developed sense of smell, which it uses for various functions, including research and choice of food. The presence of particular unwelcome aromatic substances, therefore, can negatively affect the ingestion of grass and or other essences present on pasture or in wooded areas. So the pig, being monogastric, is very sensitive to the presence of so-called unwelcome substances. It appears that most of these repellent substances are found in the ADL fraction, such as lignin, suberin, etc., or in the ethereal extract, for example, resin, latex, and so on, and in the polyphenols, such as tannins. The tannins that are present in many essences and berries are, due to their astringent flavor, particularly unwelcome to pigs, which for this reason are even able to discard the peel of chestnut by ingesting only. The term rooting represents the upheaval of the surface horizons of the ground with the formation of furrows. It is caused by the animals using the griffin as a plow. And the rooting activity or behavior of these animals is a result of many factors. It can be motivated by curiosity, but also be an exploratory activity in order to increase the level of information of the surrounding environment, as well as also arising from appetite, which leads the animal in search of the resources that are available in the ground. So rooting, indeed, is not caused only by hunger stimuli, but represents a real behavior designed to satisfy the natural instinct of the animals. So from some observation on the behavior of pigs in the pasture, it was seen how the rooting activity is exercised very intensely, even when the animals receive an ad libitum nutrition. So rooting is considered an activity that has a high environmental impact because it causes serious damage to the ground, and we can have direct damage, we can have indirect damage, or other kind of damages. According to the damages, we can have, as I told you before, direct damages. So, which could be the degradation of the turf, the breaking of the humus and leaf, or the damage to the phytocyanosis for the destruction of the root system of plants. Or we can have indirect. So they are those of the hydrometeoric type that is caused by rain, so especially on sloping areas. And the furrows in the ground, the damage to the root system of arboreal and shrub plants, but above all, the lack of grazing can make the surface of the soil particularly vulnerable to the erosive action of intense rain. So in geological unstable soils, the intense runoff of water downstreams can cause, in addition to soil erosion, also hydrogeological instability. We can also have some problems regarding tapping, so the compactation of the ground. So pigs have the habit of moving inside their area, of course, but along some preferential paths, and this will cause damage to the soil and to the turf due to the excessive trampling. We can also have some problems related to barking because this type of damage, typical of grazing in a wooded environment, it is caused by pigs through grazing on the tender bark of young plants, but especially when, after having bath in water or in ponds, they go to scratch the trunk of the tree with their back to free themselves from ectoparasites. So this type of behavior can cause considerable damage to the tree plants since it causes the breaking and the killing of the small diameter plants, so the young one, while in the large tree, this phenomenon can cause the destruction of the bark over time due to an abrasive effect. Of course, the barking of plants represents a very serious damage since the trees undergo stunted growth due to organic decay. Or another problem that we can have from the outdoor pig farming is about excavation in the ground. This because pigs love to take water to find refreshment during the summer and of course to get rid of parasites. And for this reason, they dig, especially on not very compact soils, and they create large and deep holes that after rainy events, they can fill themselves with water. So this behavior can cause serious damage, especially in the wooded environments, because the pigs not only destroys the grazing surface, but sometimes also the root system of all the surrounding plants. So these are very important damages that we have to take into account when we talk about the environmental impact of the pig outdoor farming. And regarding the impact of grazing, the extent of damage caused by pig grazing depends on two types of factors. So the animal factor, and in this case the damage is closely linked to animal density, so the number of animals each hectare, as well as the duration and on the grazing area. So it is continuous or it is rotating, and also related to the pasture factor because they are very important, the characteristic of the pasture, so both relating to the vegetation, if the cover is herbaceous or wooded, and the lay of land, if it is flat or sloping. The degradation of the grassy turfs derives from the interaction of the browsing activity with various behavioral factors such as excavation, rooting, and trampling. And of course, strictly depends on the animal load, so the number of animals inside the land. In case of overgrazing, it is possible to witness the complete destruction of the rind, especially if grazing takes place for long periods and without interruption. Indeed, the continuous stay of the animals on the pasture, without these being able to take advantage of a rest shift, prevents the regrowth of the grass, which, in addition to being excessively exploited, it is also damaged by the excessive presence of animals. And the destruction of the grassy surface, considered among the main anti-erosion factors of the sloping territories, can cause very serious hydrogeological problems. And another factor that can affect the damage to the turf is the farming system adopted. So with or without returning into the shelter in the evening, and relating to the different kind of diets to which the animals are subjected. So adequate nutrition, which fully satisfies the animal's feeling of hunger, can reduce the voracity in grazing grass and the activity of searching for food by digging and rooting. So finally, the damage from grazing to tough grass also depends on the resistance of the grass to tearing and trampling, which of course can vary according to the characteristics of the grass. So, of course, the denser ones with a denser vegetation and with deep and felted root system are more resistant to the grazing. In the case of scrub pasture, the pigs can cause considerable damage to the forest, causing, in the most serious cases, the total destruction of the undergrowth and the death of plants, even of considerable size. In the case of reduced animal loads, the elimination of part of the undergrowth, so the act of cleaning, is considered a positive factor because it reduces the risk of fire and improves the access to the forest. However, even in this case, the forest can undergo drastic changes in phytocyanosis due to a selective kind of pressure exerted by the animals. Indeed, the plants that are not damaged by the animals will reproduce themselves and gradually replace the destroyed ones. The damage to arboreal and shrub plants can affect both the root system and the epigeal one. So the formers are caused by the excavation and the rooting effect, while the others by the act of stripping and debarking. The aspect relating to change in physical, chemical, and biochemical parameters of the soil due to pig grazing have so far only small described and studied, especially in the northern European countries. So some studies found that the structure and the water conductivity of the soil are modified by analyzing samples taken in a control area that is not disturbed, so without animals, and in an area grazed by pigs, so disturbed, with a high animal density and a high rooting effect. So what happens that the high activity of rooting has resulted in a high movement of the surface layers of the soil with an increase in porosity. So the effect of excessive grazing on a given surface where erosive problems have occurred in the soil has been also assessed in economic terms, estimating a damage of about €3,000 each hectare. So, as this scientific research show, the damage to the soil is essentially linked to two factors, so the animal load and the soil characteristics, and in particular to the type of texture. So if the soil is loose or compact and lay, so it is flat or sloping, and the most significant damage occurs in a case of excessive load on compact and sloping soils, as the effect of overgrazing makes the soil particularly vulnerable to erosion and to the hydrogeological instability. So, in conclusion, in intensive pig production system, the main environmental challenges are related to the emission of nitrogen compounds and to the leaching of nitrates, nitrates, and phosphorus into the environment. To mitigate these effects, it is important to take into account the efficiency of nutrient utilization, and particularly for nitrogen. This efficiency can be further enhanced through advanced feeding strategies, such as the multi-phase feeding, the no-starch polysaccharides, or the amino acid supplementation. Because the inclusion of the non-starch polysaccharides in the diet of heavy pigs have proven effective results in reducing ammonia emission. In outdoor or grazing system, the environmental impacts are completely different and largely influenced by topography, vegetation cover, and by the grazing pressure exerted by the animals. So in sloping areas, free-range pig farming requires a particular caution as the animal activity may cause not only vegetation loss, but also soil degradation or a decline in structural stability and an increased hydrogeological risk. To mitigate this risk, the farmers should maintain a proper balance between the stocking rate, so the number of animals on the land, and the carrying capacity of both grassland and woodland ecosystem. Under low stocking rates, pig grazing can even enhance the soil fertility through limited rooting and natural manure deposition. It is therefore essential to define a sustainable animal density and to regulate the grazing period through all the year, ensuring the pasture access only during times when natural food resources are available. This approach will promote the vegetation regrowth and can maintain the ecosystem balance. So permanent outdoor pig farming, and particularly in forested environments, is generally environmentally unsustainable due to the extensive land requirements and complex management. But to minimize this kind of damage, the farmers can adopt several protective measures, such as establish shelter outside the forested area, or avoid using leading trees as fence supports, or construct small water pools or install scratching logs to satisfy the pig's natural behaviors without harming the environment. Thank you and keep learning.